As a quick warning, these stories may contain subject matter that some viewers may find distressing or triggering, and as such, viewer discretion is advised. I don't know if you'd be interested in this, but it's the most bizarre, kind of alarming, and maybe even sad story. I'm married to a wonderful man, and as of last year, we had our first kid together. However, I used to be married to a previous guy who turned out to not be a very good person, and we also had a kid together. But my current husband has been so kind to her and treated her as his own since they met when she was 4. And I'm just incredibly lucky to have such a great guy. We've always been very open and honest with each other. However, he is not and never has been the type to indulge in gossip. So, in this case, I knew it wasn't him hiding information from me, but more so him forgetting to tell me, or giving me a warning in advance. I don't blame him, but I certainly give him a hard time occasionally because of it. Anyway, on to the story. His side of the family likes to do a lot of gatherings for not only holidays, but people's birthdays, sports games, any reason they could think of to celebrate, they took advantage of it. They always invited us, but we didn't always go. A few times we went, it was fine, no issues, and I got along with a lot of his relatives. I was nervous about bringing my daughter with me, not wanting them to judge me or treat me differently, but to my relief, they all welcomed her with open arms, just as my husband did. She had so many kids to play with. His parents adored her. Everything went well. So, when they invited us to another barbecue, we made plans to go, and my daughter would be going with us. It was at his parents' house, and a lot of people were already there when we showed up. We made our way to the backyard, and my daughter immediately ran off to go swimming with the other kids that were there. Everyone was talking when someone showed up that I hadn't met before. We'd been to a few of these parties, but we also missed some of them. But I had never met this woman before. My husband introduced me to her, saying it was his Aunt Gail. She found a seat by his mom, her sister, and we continued our conversation. She asked a few questions about me, and that was it. After some time, my daughter ran up to me asking for something when Gail looked at me in shock. "That's your kid?" I proudly confirmed and told my daughter to introduce herself. As she normally does, she says her name, her age, and her favorite animal. Gail seemed to have a fake smile on her face as she responded to her, and after a brief back and forth, my daughter ran back off. Gail then asked how long we'd been dating, and I could see that she was trying to do the math in her head. Before I could respond, my husband answered and explained that my daughter was from a previous marriage. She seemed to eye me for a while as if I was lying, and she could see through me, but it wasn't a lie. If I have to explain any further, I do it similar to what I did above, without giving much detail. But my husband's mom changed the subject and got Gail talking about something else. Awkward conversations seemingly averted. When the food was done, I made my daughter's plate and helped the other kids, and when they were all settled, I made my own and joined my husband and some others in eating. Again, everyone was doing their own thing, and sometime after everyone had eaten, the kids started playing around with some fake swords and water guns. My daughter ran over to me like she wanted to spray me, so I gave her the normal parental look. The parents out there will understand what I mean. Just a playful look of "don't you dare." But she also had her just as equally evil grin, and I knew it was going to happen. So I braced myself as I got splashed with water. I stood up to play with her and made the comment, as some parents do, "I brought you into this world, little girl, don't make me take you out of it." She screamed and I went to chase her. Some people were laughing and my husband even told her to run. But when I caught her, she tried to play dead, laying still with her tongue sticking out. So my husband went to grab her when she jumped up. He always played around with her like that, and it's one of the reasons we both love him. Anyways, after a bit of playful back and forth, my husband helped me up, and we went back to the deck, my daughter now preoccupied. As we approached, I noticed Gail had a pretty angry look on her face, while his mom kind of had the look of concern. Her eyes were wide, and she was looking back between my husband and Gail. I didn't know what was wrong. I certainly wasn't going to pretend like it was any of my business, so I just grabbed my drink and watched the kids. His mom started to say something when Gail loudly said, "That's not funny, Sandra." I looked over at her confused and at a loss for words. "I'm sorry?" His mom touched her knee and tried saying something like, "She was just playing around, Gail," but she seemed to lose it. She adjusted in her chair. "Playing around?" Then my husband's dad chimed in from over by the fire pit. "She was just joking with her kid, Gail. Let it go." Obviously annoyed with her. "Well, it wasn't very funny to me," Gail said, as she stormed off inside. I immediately started apologizing profusely. I didn't know what I did, but apparently I had done something. His mom said it was fine and ran off after her. My husband told me everything was okay, and his father did too. No one would tell me what had set her off, and why, but they just tried to assure me that it wasn't my fault. No matter how much they said it, though, I felt like I really messed up and ruined the night. Apparently, Gail left shortly after that, and everyone else tried to and successfully lifted the mood again, but I was dwelling on it. Hard. I don't know what happened, nor what I did or said. Once we got back home and my daughter was in bed, I finally asked what the heck had happened. My husband said that Gail just gets sensitive around kids, but that made even less sense, and I had to push him to tell me more. I feel bad, but as I was going to dwell on it forever until I figured out what I had done and how to avoid it in the future. But what he told me was not what I was expecting. Apparently, back when my husband was still a child, Gail also had a child. But she was not the best parent. His words, not mine. She did not want the kid, but yet she kept it. But over time, she got better at it and seemed to show her love for her daughter. Then one day, there was a lot of talking between his parents that he couldn't hear, and the next thing he knew, Gail was staying with them for a few days, until she wasn't, and then he didn't see her for a while. It turns out, Gail's daughter died, but she didn't report it until the day after. That alone caused a lot of suspicion, as anyone would presume. There was a huge court case about it, and eventually it was ruled an accident. Again, my husband was still very young, so he didn't get to hear about this until he was older. Even then, he didn't probe into it, which was understandable. Apparently, my comment of taking you out set her off. And while it was just a saying and I was just playing around, it really affected her. And I honestly felt horrible for it. I had no idea, and apparently no one thought it was necessary to bring it up, which I also understood. "Hi, meet my Aunt Gail. She lost her kid, so watch what you say." Yeah, there's really no way to bring that up. But apparently the whole thing caused quite a rift in their family because of the whole situation. Some family members feel like she did it on purpose, and she should have been charged to the full extent. I kind of got a vague rundown of what happened from my husband and left it at that. But when we found out I was pregnant and she started acting strange around me, I decided to look into it more myself. I found the articles about it online and at our local library, and let's just say, I can definitely see why so many people think there was something more that happened. I don't want to go into full details, because I don't want to reveal my family more than I already have. Which is also why I called her Gail. It's not her real name. But since learning this, I have kind of felt uncomfortable around her. She's made some odd comments and would look at my infant in a way that would make anyone hold them tighter. I know there's really nothing I can do at this point, but it sits in my head and sometimes I think about it. Thankfully, we only see her maybe twice a year at his parents' house, so we can avoid her for the most part. But having 2 kids now, and knowing that they mean the world to me and my husband, I can't imagine that kind of loss. And I hope that she truly is innocent. I have a story about a secret that my family kept for a long time. And while I understand why it was kept from me, it's one of those things that, when I found out what happened, it hit me hard. My opinion on the people involved obviously changed by the end of it, and someone that I thought was a hero ended up being nothing more than a terrible person. For my entire childhood, I genuinely thought that my dad was a hero. I thought that he was in the military and fighting for my country. I was proud of him, even though I could barely remember what he looked like. I guess I should step back a slight bit. When I was much younger, my dad was present. I have a couple photos of my dad with myself and my mom. I was the first and only kid that my mom and dad had. I can't even really give many memories of my father, because I was only around 5 when he disappeared from my life. Obviously, I didn't understand why he was no longer in my life at first. I just know that he wasn't there. I do have one memory, though. I remember that it was at night. I was crying, and my dad gave me this tight hug saying something along the lines of, "Sorry, buddy. I'll be back eventually. You'll be good, okay?" The only problem is that I'm not even sure if this memory is real. It's probably not. I think it's just one that I made up for some reason. One that I fabricated in my mind to make sense of my father's absence. To go along with this, my mother told me that my father was in the military. She told me that he had been shipped out and that he was fighting the bad guys to save the country. When I started to get older and more cognizant, it made sense that he wasn't home because he was a soldier. When he disappeared, it was 2001. I obviously didn't know what happened on 9/11 at the time, but again, as I got older and learned about it, it made sense that he was overseas fighting a war. As I got older, I always made it a point to mention how much of a hero my dad was. I would tell my teachers, my friends, people that I barely spoke to. I would always say that my dad was in another country fighting people that were evil. My mother started the lie, but my family kept it going. They would always go with what she told me. I spent birthdays without my father, holidays without him, and it was hard as a little boy. I know I asked my mom numerous times why he wasn't able to come home for at least Christmas, and she would just tell me that he would be home soon, and that he couldn't abandon his post. I would ask why he never called or wrote us letters, but she would just say that the calls would get really expensive, and then said that he had written me letters. She would gaslight me into believing that he had sent letters for my birthday last year or a few years ago. She had even told me that one of my presents from Christmas was from him. I believed every bit of it. I believed that the military wasn't letting him come home and that he had sent me the letters or presents. She kept this up until I was in my preteens, around 12 years old. When I was 12, things started to not add up. It would have been 2008-ish, and I was old enough to watch the news, and I saw the world and events that were happening. It had hit a point where it didn't make sense for why he hadn't come home, and my preteen brain hit a point where I wanted to confront my mom and ask her for the truth. So I did. I confronted her at one point and asked her, "Hey, Mom, "You need to tell me the truth about Dad. He's not overseas. He would have come home by now. Where is he?" At this point, my mom had the chance to tell me the truth. But instead, she broke down crying and told me something else. She told me that while my dad was overseas, he had been killed in action. She looked me dead in the eyes and told me that my father had died in 2003, that he was killed over in Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever, and that she wanted to tell me, but she couldn't ever bring herself to do so. So, once again, she told me that my father was a hero, that he was killed defending the country, that he had died with honor. It's almost sad that I could wish that this was actually the truth, but what really happened was not this. I found out the real truth when I turned 20, about 8 years ago. It was the day of my 20th birthday. I had made it to my 20th birthday without my father. My mother had done her best to raise me, but I had to do a lot of growth myself. I had to watch the other boys be taught how to do things by their fathers, and wish that I could have that too. But I couldn't, right? Because my father was, according to my mother, killed in action overseas. All of it was so emotionally confusing. I wanted my father to be in my life, but I was also proud of him for his sacrifice. But when I turned 20 and was having dinner with my mother and my grandma, something came up that involved my dad. My grandmother made a comment that confused me. "Well, it's sad what happened, but at least he won't be able to get to you two ever again." She said this, and I stared at her in confusion. Then I saw my mom start to have that panicking face she had when she told me he was dead. It was then that it clicked that something was wrong. I wasn't being told something, or someone was lying. I asked my grandma what she meant by that, not even hesitating or giving myself time to think about it. She looked at me with her mouth open like she'd been caught in something, and then looked at my mom. My mom started crying at this point, and my grandmother apologized, telling her that she thought I knew about the whole thing and that my mother had told me. My mom said that we would have a conversation after dinner, but I wasn't really hungry at this point. I could feel the pit in my stomach growing, knowing that they were hiding something. When we got home that night, my grandmother and mother sat me down. And at that point, I was told the truth. A truth that I didn't want to hear. Back when I was 4 or 5, when my father left my life, it wasn't because he was shipped overseas to fight terrorism. It was because he was an absolute monster. That night that he went away because he attempted to murder my mother, and he likely would have killed me too. And for whatever reason, my father snapped that night, and in a drunken rage had stabbed my mother 3 times and left her for dead. I was told that he attacked her because she tried to stop him from beating me, a 5-year-old. He had hit me numerous times that night, apparently knocking me unconscious, and then tried to kill my mother. My grandmother had been there that night, and she called the police when he was attacking me, and it's because of her that my father was stopped. My mother's life was saved, and possibly my life was saved. For the entirety of my childhood, I thought my father was this amazing person, a hero. I told people I was proud of him, that I missed him and loved him, but the entire time he was actually an attempted murderer that would have likely killed my mother had the police not showed up. The comment that my grandmother made was actually because my father had died in prison recently. He had apparently gone into cardiac arrest and was unable to be revived, and my mother had been notified of it a couple days prior to them telling me about all of this. This was probably the hardest day of my life. To find out that the man I wished had been there every day growing up had almost ended my life. It's been a few years now, and I'd like to say that I've moved on from all this, but it's still something that tears at me from time to time. I don't blame my mother for keeping this all from me, but it's still so painful to know that she had lied. I'm sharing this now in hopes of letting some of it go, putting some of it out into the world, hoping it'll make it a bit easier. To those who knew me growing up, I'm sorry for lying to you about my father. I believed all those lies myself, and I thought I was telling you all about this amazing man that was an honest hero, when, come to find out, he couldn't have been more of a villain. And to my younger self, I wish I could go back and give you a hug to prepare you for the pain you would feel when you're told that your dad is dead. Both the first and the second time. So, this is something that I have been living with for almost a year now. Any names I give here will be made up to make things easier. I'm sure you will all understand why. Last year, I thought it would be a really thoughtful and sentimental Christmas gift to my family to trace our family history and put it all together as something to show off. I've been wanting to learn more about our lineage, about my ancestors and family that I was never able to meet. I was all ready to pay for that family history website and DNA place. I'm sure you know which ones I'm talking about. I was hoping to get some names and little details here and there from family members, so it was probably around August or September when I started asking. I got some pretty normal answers and a decent amount of information from people like my parents and aunts and uncles. But when it came to my maternal grandparents, things seemed to get strange. The first time I asked, it was something simple such as where they grew up, their childhood home, city, and state. My grandma gave me a curious look at first, but when I said I was just interested in the houses, she became an open book. She told me the house that she lived in, the school that she went to, and even the names of her close friends. I always loved hearing the stories she told, as she was always so animated about it. But when I started pushing further into the years they started having kids, she seemed to tone down her excitement. Her responses were vague and didn't really give me more than just the days my mom, aunt, and uncles were born, and that was it. She didn't even mention the hospitals. I just thought maybe she was tired after everything else she already told me, so I let it go. With the information I had, I started putting it all together and started working on the site. While I went through the details, I started having issues linking my Aunt Lisa. The site seemed to have trouble locating her. Unfortunately, unlike my other aunts and uncles, Lisa never had any kids, so I couldn't even backtrack to bring her up. It did have a method to add someone manually, but I didn't have all the information, so I needed to go back and ask. I started with my mom, who was able to give some information, but said that my grandma would definitely know more. So I went back to her. But asking specifically about Lisa seemed to shut her down. She asked me again why I needed to know, and as I continued to be vague, she continued to become more and more upset. I really wanted this to be for her especially, but it was about to turn into a full-blown argument, so I gave up. I told her that I was just trying to put together a family tree for us, and just wanted to get as much information as I could. But that explanation only seemed to make her more anxious. She told me it was a waste of time, that those DNA tests aren't very accurate, and can't assure they will give you the right results back. She then said the family could just give me any information I needed. That's when I reminded her that I just tried to and she had shut me down. She didn't really want to talk after that and said that she would work on it with me later. All I could do was drop it, but there was no way I could let this go. My grandmother, the woman that could normally talk your ear off, refused to talk about the birth of her first child. Something that should normally be a happy moment, right? So, I took this to the genealogy center in my state. Surely there had to be information there, as my family, at least as far as my maternal great-grandparents, had always lived in this state. But they also had nothing. I could find information on my mom and her other 7 siblings, but nothing for Aunt Lisa. How was this possible? She was born in the late 60s, so while it was some time ago, it wasn't that long. My Uncle Jack was second born, and while it did take some time, I was able to find him. So why not Lisa? Something wasn't adding up. I started looking into reasons why this could happen, and some of the reasons I found included lack of records for birth, which typically happened with the homeless or migrating families, loss of records, adoptions, also some illegal adoptions, and other unsavory ways people get kids. But none of these made sense. Lisa looked like the rest of us. Dark hair, brown eyes. In fact, she looked very similar to my mom, other than Lisa being super tall. Was it really possible that she was brought into the family? And if so, why was it such a big deal? This was turning into a situation bigger than just an ancestry and family tree thing, and I was determined to figure out what was happening. I went and got my grandma's favorite little cakes, raked up her leaves in her yard, and gave her little dog a bath. Anything to make her happy and put her in a good mood. As we sat in the living room eating cake, she finally sighed and said that she knew what I was doing. She's a very smart lady. She told me that there was a good reason why she didn't talk much about Lisa's birth, and was surprised because I was the only person that ever really pushed it. She took me to the basement, and had me go through some very old and warped boxes that had obvious water damage. She pulled out a few loose pieces of stationery as well as 2 pictures. One was of an infant, and the other was of the infant and my grandparents. On the back of the infant picture was a date, Lisa's birth date, and the one with my grandparents was dated about a week after. But the picture of the infant had the name Elizabeth on it. My grandma confirmed that the infant was indeed Lisa, and the other was a picture when they met her and took her home. Lisa was born as Elizabeth, and she was not biologically hers. Okay, so she was adopted. No big deal, right? No reason to make it such a secret. But, of course, it wasn't exactly legal. At the time, my grandparents had been trying to have a kid with no luck. They were both in a very bad state of mind and had all but just given up. However, my grandpa had been working for someone, for a legitimate business, but the owner was a known member of a local and very dangerous mob. My grandpa always stayed loyal to the company, in fear that if he left, something could happen to them, but he also minded his own business. But at some point, he was now within the view of this mob guy, and when his teenage son got another girl pregnant, they had to do something about it. Without my grandma actually saying it, she basically explained that the girl's family was threatened to give the baby up, but their solution was to give the kid to Abe and his wife, my grandparents, since they had been trying so hard for their own kid. She was basically given to them by force, and my grandfather paid a nice sum of money to stay quiet and never mention them again. So, when they brought her home, they had a mix of emotions. But one thing my grandma couldn't handle was that they were always watching them. My grandma loved her and knew that she was hers the moment she saw her, but she was worried about the what-ifs. So, my grandpa was given the boss's blessing to leave the city. And so they did. And they changed my aunt's name. They just vowed to not tell anyone where she came from and told family they just hid the pregnancy in fear they may lose the baby. And no one questioned this. She thinks that taking Lisa in is what caused her to be able to have 7 other kids. And she truly believes that she was a blessing to the family. Not that I would disagree. My Aunt Lisa is a wonderful person. And she told me that my grandpa would have chewed her out if he knew she told me. He had actually passed away 2 years prior. I promised her that I wouldn't tell anyone, and she threatened that if I did, she would take me with her to the grave. Mostly joking, I think. So, here I am now with the knowledge that my aunt is not biologically related, and telling her that could cause potential safety concerns if anyone from my grandfather's working days is still around. I have not said a word, but part of me wonders if her biological mother is out there, wondering what happened to her baby. I never did finish the tree for our family. I still plan to, but now I'm just trying to figure out if I want to keep it for myself, and maybe, just maybe, I can find something related to her birth and give some people some closure. So that, my friends, was a collection of some scary, disturbing, dark family secrets, however you want to look at those. Definitely not a selection of stories that I can end the video on a higher note, on a more optimistic or comedic note like I usually do. I mean, I can do optimism, so I guess let's shift into optimism some. This was a collection of dark family secret stories. Stories where there were secrets in the family that were disturbing for whatever reason. And, yeah. I don't typically venture into darker content like this, other than, like, you know, sometimes with, like, the stalker stories and such, but I really do enjoy, again, is never the right word to use in this context, but I'm going to use it because I can't think of a synonym that isn't joyful in this, for the structure here. But I do often enjoy these stories because they are interesting. To me, I find them, they're very intriguing stories, and sometimes they can venture into depressing or disturbing, but they have always been interesting. I know Joel, Let's Read, has done some stories like this, and I don't know. I'm not much into, like, the gory and stories, but sometimes, like, the psychologically darker stories, I guess, are interesting to me. I don't want to say, like, entertaining, but just interesting. They catch my attention, if that makes more sense. So, hopefully, these stories caught your attention as well. If they did, please do consider hitting that like button on the video. That helps a lot. If you're new to the channel and want more scary stories or content like this, just hit the subscribe button and the bell icon next to it. If you're feeling bold, you can go down below the video, leave me a comment with your thoughts, how you're doing, what's going on with you, how's your week, you know, that kind of stuff. You can also, if you have one, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to submit your scary story to be read on the podcast or the channel. There are also options of listening to me over on Apple or Spotify, your choice. Spotify is a very popular platform for my podcast, thankfully. YouTube does pretty well too, so if you want to stay here, that's fine as well. You can join Patreon memberships to get early access to content like this. I also do have a merch store. If you want to check them all out, links are in the description below. If not, totally fine, I get it. All that said, friends, in this part, this optimistic section of the outro, I absolutely can do, and I will do. Because sometimes, even with stories like this, you need to know that you are loved, and that you are valid, that you are important. You're the best you that you can be, no matter your circumstances. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, and don't forget it. And until I see you next time, my friends, much love, and sleep well.